Edward Lawrence, thank you so much for more. Let's bring in professional capital management founder and CEO Antoni Pompliano, along with Unleash Prosperity senior fellow and Heritage Foundation public finance economist Antoni. I'm going to go ahead and start with you because you've got some saying this is going to rebalance trade. You've got the other side saying he's started a trade war. And at the end of his report, Edward Lawrence talks about how some of the other countries may actually come to the table as soon as tomorrow. So how does this all play out? People were worried today. Stock market was worried today. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're not going to come to some resolution on this and that we're going to have tariffs in place forever.
Well, absolutely, Jackie. Let's keep in mind that when we look at the population of Wall Street, if you will, you're talking about an entire generation of folks who have been taught this mantra of free trade always and everywhere in all circumstances, and there's never any good reason to implement tariffs. I'm sorry, but that's just not true, right? There are lots of reasons why you should implement tariffs, and President Trump is exploring a lot of those right now. Obviously, they're a source of revenue. They can be used as a negotiating tool. They can be used to help level the playing field when it comes to forcing other nations to reduce both their tariffs and non-tariff barriers. And when it comes to Canada, they are big offenders on both of those fronts, the tariff and the non-tariff barriers. So think of things like quotas. If we look at American dairy farmers or American factory workers, those people are put at a tremendous disadvantage because it is very difficult for them to get their output, their production into Canadian markets. Again, because of those tariff and non-tariff barriers that have been put in place by the Canadian government. So what essentially President Trump is doing here is forcing the Canadian government's hand into coming to the table and negotiating all of these things. And if they're not going to, then fine, we'll have a trade war and we'll win because the advantage is literally 10-1 when you look at the numbers in terms of our exports and theirs.
Antoni, I want to expand on that thought. I think the White House would do well, by the way, to put out examples and lists of where these tariffs are so egregious and how they're so harmful to American competition. But with that aside, expand on that thought because, yes, if you produce in America, there are no tariffs, so you don't have to worry about it. But explain to us how bad it is within Mexico and Canada.
Well, I think there's a golden rule, right? Do unto others as you want done unto you. And that's what the United States is doing here, is if these countries are going to tariff us, if they're going to subsidize their producers to flood our country with cheap products, then we're simply leveling that playing field, as EJ pointed out. And I think that a really important point here is there is no free market. If they are tariffing us, then there is no free market. We have to try to level that playing field. On top of that, I also think that there's a really big part here where what the president is doing is he's basically explaining to people very early on in his administration that he's not playing around. When he says he's going to do something, he goes ahead and he does it. And I think what that will do over time is many of these countries are going to come to the negotiating table. They're going to take them seriously. They're going to give quite a bit. And I think that the United States will be better off when it comes out on the other side of this negotiation.
Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick spoke with our very own Larry Kudlow about the tariffs a short time ago. Listen.
The concept of China saying, what kind of war is this? It's a drug war. It's not a trade war. It's not a tariff war. They still are giving maximum subsidies to producing the ingredients for opioids that are killing Americans. So I tell you what, they are thumbing their nose at the president. And you know how that goes. You thumb your nose at this president, you are going to get something back big and strong that says stop it. And that's what he's doing with China right now.
And so there's some confusion about that. A lot of people saying, well, where is this starting? Is this about manufacturing? Is this about trade? Is this about generating revenue from tariffs? No, it's about fentanyl and it's about drugs. And I thought it was really interesting today with Trudeau talking about what they have done. And I'm not saying Canada hasn't tried. Right. I just don't think they have done what the president thinks is sufficient or where he wants them to be. They're even implementing a fentanyl czar to look at this. So I would say even in the lead up to the implementation of tariffs, he's gotten some of his agenda accomplished here. He's got them moving on something that they weren't moving on.
That's exactly right, Jackie. And I think as time goes on, as we continue to see the tariffs ramp up, both in terms of rhetoric and reality, I think it will force Canada more and more to the negotiating table, and the president will get more of what he wants, which is more of what America wants. We don't want anyone dying from fentanyl in this country. So it's not enough that Canada talks about taking baby steps, essentially, to solve the problem. No, we want the problem actually solved. We want them to stop China dumping fentanyl into Canada that will then come here. But we also want them to stop China from dumping products into Canada. Let's not forget that China is essentially abusing various provisions within the USMCA, the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Trade Agreement, in order to basically set up shop in places like Canada, dump products there, which are then sent to the United States under the guise of being part of the USMCA. So really, it's just a way that Canada is allowing China to circumvent the rules. So whether we're talking about a drug war or we're talking about a trade war, I think the reality here is exactly the same, and the tool to solve both of those problems is exactly the same.
Antoni, I want to get your take on the key concern for Americans, which is inflation. What should the president's economic message be tonight on how he's tackling inflation?
Well, look, if you actually go ahead and you take a look at other alternative inflation metrics, something like Trueflation, which is a real-time alternative data point, it's actually showing that inflation's 1.5%. And so a lot of the work that the president and his administration is doing is very deflationary. We're cutting government spending. And Milton Friedman said it best. The only place that inflation is created is in Washington. And if we can get government spending down, inflation will come down as well. But I really think that Americans have to understand that, yes, there is going to be a stock market that is coming down, as we're seeing already. But Scott Bessent, the Treasury Secretary, said it best when he came out and he said, look, we are focused on Main Street and on the consumer. Wall Street is going to be fine. We've had this epic run in the stock market, but Main Street and the consumer, they are hurting, and that's ultimately what people are focused on. Get the interest rates down, get inflation down, and if they do both of those, then America will end up being a much better place.
Yeah, and the market can't just keep going up forever. It has had an epic run, Antoni, you're right. And so some profit taking actually is normal, and corrections are normal. And we're to be expected this year, even without some of these tariffs on the table and some of this policy. Antoni, EJ, great having you tonight. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.